What would I say to the people who are sitting in front of their computers, believing in revolution? I think I would say the same thing as those people in the 16th and 17th and 18th century who went to church and who believed in universal redemption or realization in heaven. I believe that they're subjects or victims of false consciousness, or they're exploited, particularly those of them who stupidly give away their labor for free so that young men in Silicon Valley can become infinitely rich.
The great question is whether or not the web has been a force for democratization, whether it has made us all equal.
The web's democratic in one way and distinctly undemocratic in another way, and I think a lot of the confusion about the political ramifications have to do with that one word having so many meanings. So it's democratic in that it quite literally delivers power to the people. It essentially opens up participation in the public sphere.
Facebook's mission is all about giving people a voice and bringing people closer together. Those are democratic values, and we're proud of them.
You know, the idea that you and I can, from behind a flickering computer screen, reach hundreds of people at the touch of a button.
In the 20th century, if you had something to say in public, you couldn't, period.
And so the question becomes, is there some way that we can empower our generation, even shy kids like me, to step up to the microphone and make our voices heard? That new microphone was the internet.
Anyone who wants to participate, has at least the means to participate, is a huge change.
If getting online and being able to write down your thoughts and being able to say pretty much whatever you want and having a certain number of people read it, if that's freedom, I don't know if that is an effective or even rich kind of human freedom. I think the internet empowers anyone who can use it, and it empowers the people who can use it most effectively even more. It can empower a government to repress an insurrection. It can empower the insurrection itself.
Because China has never had an independent media and the free public space, internet is a first time that as an alternative of the public media space ever since 1949.
I think what the Chinese government have noticed is that the kinds of uprising, of complaint, of anxiety, also these little loyalties that are being created, can be channeled just as easily by national politicians as against national politicians. And national politicians have the huge added advantage that they have already centralized the power.
So again, it's a double-edged sword.
Again, Chinese internet is not a real free space. It's still heavily policed. However, it's much freer than what you can say and what you can hear on the official media.
Newspapers are an authoritarian regime's worst enemy. So what happens when an authoritarian regime comes to power? They close down all the newspapers. They take over all the TV and the radio stations.
The threats to the right to know are the usual powers that have been, who would rather that you didn't know certain things, because that's how they control people.
Everyone will benefit from the spread of transparency, immediacy, and accountability through the web. I think these are forces definitely for good.
Our dream is that anybody anywhere may have access to anything that human beings do with their minds one day.
From the Queen of England to the most humble farmer in Africa, with a simple touch of a mic, everyone can easily access all of humanity's information. That, my friends, is the power of the new search experience that we are building at Google. And it will change how you and I experience this beautiful journey that we call life.
You know, the human mind has its limitations, but we just think that humans are more likely to achieve their ultimate purpose, whatever that may be, if they have the capacity to completely explore the possibility space of what can be known. Because that you know, that capacity is being given us by the internet, and that can change everything.
And that's why so many totalitarian regimes are resisting them, and doing everything they can. And sometimes it's pretty complicated to block the free flow of information on the internet.
What states tend to do in the face of the web is try and put out the fires, the scandals, the criticisms, the complaints.
It is extremely hard for the authority to completely, absolutely control any type of information. Now what we see is the internet actually driving the media agenda about covering events, particularly on the issue of social justice, the police brutality, corruption, or even natural disaster. Many of these areas, government used to have the complete control of the information, but now internet breaks that.
There are those who will say the moment it became really commercialized, the moment the large corporations that control the pipelines started to buy each other up, and you started to get these huge mergers, that somehow the pioneering spirit went out of it and the freedom died, people will say.
Adverts leverage the idea of rebellion, of resistance to authority as a way of selling products. So the counterculture has become the heart of capitalism. The web is the digital version of capitalism, and social media is the next stage in post-industrial capitalism. There's reality and there's ideology. There's a world on the one hand where a lot of young men, and they tend to be young men, spout a lot of nonsense, in my view, about democratization and egalitarianism and the opening up of everything. They will talk about doing no evil. They will attempt to reform the world in their image. The reality, though, is they're monopolizing the print business. They're putting newspapers out of business.
It seems to me that it's a real threat to the established estates, as they used to be called. There were the four estates in Britain: the Lord's Spiritual, the Lord's Temporal, the Commons, and the Fourth Estate, as it was always known, the press. The press has been deeply upset and worried, of course, by how particularly Google and other aggregators of content that they have spent a lot of money assembling have been able to distribute it freely, such that people now regard it as almost their right to have free news.
What is so different now is that for the first time, what is being debated is not being dictated by a hierarchy at the top of a newspaper or a television operation, but is really being much more organic in terms of what is on people's minds and what they care about and what they're passionate about. Because people don't want just to consume news. They want to engage with news. They want to sort of talk back and give their own opinion around what they're reading.
In the United States, the way we know things is through 1 billion sources, and the most important of those sources are social media sources, increasingly completely uncontrolled by any form of editor.
These are companies that generally live or die on the basis of ad sales, and ad sales happen when people click more. Increasingly, we see different worlds online. Increasingly, the internet is showing us what it thinks we want to see, not necessarily the world as it is. Increasingly, we're sort of surrounded by this membrane of personalized filters. And the thing is that this sort of creates a filter bubble. It creates a personal universe of unique information that makes it through all of these filters. The traditional media give us a balance. You get some Justin Bieber and some Afghanistan. You get some information vegetables and some information dessert. But because the filter bubble is just focused on what are you going to click most, what are you going to click next, there are very different dynamics at play. What the filter bubble tends to do is to sort of push that balance in one direction. Now, you don't necessarily choose what gets into your filter bubble. These algorithms are doing the work for you. And therefore, importantly, you don't really know what is outside of it. You don't really know what you're missing.
What this fragmentation means is that there's no common story, no common facts, radical polarization in what we know, and radical polarization in what we should do.
So what you get in the web is all of the contending of special interest that you expect in a democracy, but you don't get many of the mechanisms for defending the overall process or outcome from those special interests.
We still know what the public's will is today, all the time, thousands of polls asking us, what do we think? But this will that gets identified, what we, the people, believe, is not informed by common facts.
The web is really good at factionalization and special interests and empowering people to have incredibly loud arguments all hours of the day and night. But it's not at all good at figuring out of the massive signal that that argument generates what any group of people should do. In a way, democracy is for creating a playing field and a set of rules for factions to contend with each other. So if by democracy you don't just mean engagement and participation and availability to be part of the public sphere, but you mean the contending of political ideas in such a way that an outcome is reached and it balances the rights of the minority with the rights of the majority, the web is not democratic at all.
The evidence, I think, of the last 20 years is that while the web has democratized all sorts of aspects of our lives, it's democratized celebrity, it's, as it were, easier and quicker to become a celebrity, politics in the West has become less democratic. The elites have become narrower. It's husband and wife teams, it's Bill and Hillary, it's the Miliband brothers. You find that people who were at university together 20 years ago are now sharing power in Washington or in London. So there's a narrowing of political elites at the same time as there's this huge democratization of all sorts of other aspects of our lives. And the connection was never made. That's the one thing that's missing with this kind of internet politics, the connection between this incredibly dynamic but essentially social form of politics, which is individuals communicating with other individuals, sharing their feelings, their emotions, and elite politics. And that gap is still there. Nothing about the web has closed it so far.
The human social history has been filled with inventions and developments and techniques that have threatened the way we arranged ourselves.
I don't think that the internet has contributed to the democratization of the political campaign. I think it's made the political campaign perhaps more imbalanced than it's ever been before. I think the web will really take on the contours of what culture has always been. There'll be hierarchies, there'll be elites, because we live in a democratic, vigorous society. There will be many doors open to people. Democracy, the democratic vitality will still rule American culture, but there will be the same restrictions, the same exclusive niches that there have always been. Like all technology, the internet is not a cure for human nature, it's an amplification of human nature, both the good and the bad of it.
I do genuinely believe there is a dispensation in politics in the West, that the focus, the weight of authority has shifted. Now, there is no focused way that people express themselves on the internet, but I think that is the next challenge for democracy, is to use the fact that this surely is the way that we can harness vox populi, vox dei, the will of the people.
We can, if a democracy learns how to listen to us, speak in a way that ought to be respected. And we have to find a way, because the alternative that imagines us as a people who responds the way democracy engages us today. For example, again, thanks to my friend Donald Trump, I have a great example here. He tweeted yesterday, "My use of social media is not presidential, it's modern day presidential. Make America great again." If this is the way our democracy engages with us, this is not just not great about America. It is hopeless about the future of democracy.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a risk-reward ratio here, and for us the reward is so great that whatever the risk is, we try and contain it and understand it at best, but what we don't do is say the risk is too great.
Because I think we really actually need the internet to be that thing that connects us to new ideas and to new people and to new ways of thinking. And we need it not just because it makes life a more satisfying endeavor, but because actually I don't think we can solve many of the big problems that are in front of us in any other way. You know, if you think about poverty, or you think about climate change, or you think about terrorism, these are not problems that can be solved by someone sitting in a room somewhere. They're problems that require solutions that bring people together across vast differences from different disciplines and different continents, thinking in different ways and talking to each other and convincing each other about a common solution. And I don't think that that can happen if we're all stuck in a web of one.